So last week, I made this video which showcased facts which made it look like Hoyoverse have forgotten about Genshin's first ever region, which is Mondstadt. And in the comments of that video, a lot of people were quick to give their speculations over what sort of plans Hoyo might have for the City of Freedom, and some were also quick to point out that I might have forgotten to mention a couple more forgotten Mondstadt stuff that I actually did mention in a quick list that I made at the start of that video, or have mentioned as a simple passing remark somewhere within it. Now, I didn't really want to focus on those storylines or content speculations, but considering there are so many people who are still enthusiastic about future Mondstadt content, I decided that I'd use this opportunity to dive into their thoughts and theories and discuss Mondstadt's future in a more detailed capacity. There are potential moments in this video where we might be broaching upon spoilers regarding some of the recent Archon Quest content, particularly Natlan, so I'll just put that as a warning for now. With that out of the way, the name's Leafy, and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Slow About Games Genshin Edition. I want to preface this video by clarifying that I don't actually think that Hoyo has completely forgotten about Mondstadt, as some people in that video have vehemently pointed out. I do agree that in the long run, Mondstadt will come back to play a big role, and that it definitely has a future in Genshin's overall story. I also do believe, and people in the comment section of that video have shown, that us the players haven't forgotten about Mondstadt at all, but it doesn't change the fact that the devs sure place very little proper attention to the region in general. I just couldn't put it in the title of the video because it would have been too long. And people really showed that they are still waiting for Mondstadt content. Though, admittedly, it was sort of funny to see that people's prediction of when new Mondstadt content would come out just kept on going farther and farther into future version releases, up until people were predicting for it to come out in the version 7.0s. At least, it's a sign that when Mondstadt does invariably come back into the main picture, then there will be a lot of people who'd be more than happy to welcome it, myself included. From those content predictions though, the commenters also began placing their thoughts of what it is that they'd like to see come next. And amongst all the things speculated about in that video, one of them stood out the most in the comment section, which is the question of what sort of content will Venti's second character story quest would be focusing on. For those of you who are unaware of this fact, amongst the archons of the first 4 regions of Genshin, that being Venti, Zhongli, A, and Nahida, Venti is the only one who have yet to receive a second chapter to his story quest. Zhongli had one with the release of Ashdaha, A with our dive into the true nature of Makoto's death, and Nahida with their encounter against Apep. Venti's first story quest shows us a glimpse of his divine powers, and yes, that's not up for debate. Though he wasn't exactly terraforming random parts of his land, being able to manifest the soul of a deceased and then freeing said soul from his friend's burden of eternal regret is divine enough in my books. However, while Venti's showcase of his own form of divine power was indeed interesting in its own way, it's not something that you could attribute to having that big of a role to play in the overall lore of the story. And this is where that second chapter to his character story can come into play, since every other Archon's second chapter has always focused on a certain power or element that has an influence over Teyvat as a whole. Zhongli's second quest explores the concept of erosion and how said erosion is affecting the old beings of Teyvat, while both A and Nahida's story quest tackles the further effects of the corruption that plagues Teyvat. A's side of the story focusing on how the ley lines are starting to become compromised, while Nahida's quest explores the aftermath of what happened when Nibelung, the king of the dragons, brought forbidden knowledge from the world outside of Teyvat. So people began speculating over what it is that he's truly hiding, or whether or not does Mondstadt have another area for us to explore that would be prevalent to the lore. Now, my mistake from the first video was that I forgot to mention how I would associate my theories of what the Nameless Island could serve to contribute to the lore to the notion that Venti's second story quest might have something to do with exploring this location or expanding it in a much more extensive manner. Cause it would honestly be such a convenient turn of events to utilize this island that has been doing nothing but sit there stagnant ever since release, and have it turn into an area of a lore piece that actually contributes to the present state of Genshin's story. Not to mention with its connections with the goddess of time, or Istaroth, also known as one of the heavenly principles for Shining Shades, then it should be easy for the devs to use these islands to further Mondstadt's own lore. Another speculation that I really liked was something that Mintzliff brought up in her short about Venti's second story quest, where she theorized that it might have something to do with Old Mondstadt, and more specifically, the true nature of how the Caribbean's tower still upholds that wind barrier that seemed to have stood there for quite a long time. Because evidently, it's not something that Venti himself had any hand in creating, since he couldn't do much about it when we tried to enter the tower. There was no reason for him to hold back on his powers in order to hide his identity at that point anyway, since Jean and Diluc have already figured out that he was indeed Barbados. Yeah, seriously, why isn't this a plot point that Hoyo uses more often? Anyway, that meant that he didn't have to hold back in manipulating the wall if he really could, so something else must be maintaining that wall of elemental energy, something that has managed to persist on its own even against the new age of Tevat, and is old enough of an existence up to the point where Venti, the god of wind himself, can't freely manipulate it. And while some of you may not realize it, the current remnant of Old Mondstadt is charitably massive. Compared to Mondstadt city itself, this place was huge. There's no telling if they had some sort of underground sections that Hoyo can put up by just digging its bottom side and make some sort of expansion there. And hell, they can just about dig up one side of the mountains that surround the old city and have it become the gateway to more of Mondstadt's northern areas. Point is, there are plenty of Mondstadt lore that could be used for Venti's second story quest. We can safely say that Venti will soon have his Tevat influencing arc sooner or later. Some people have also speculated that it will have something to do with Khaenri'ah, and while I think it's possible, I think it would also result in the same things that we have heard from Zhongli, or I guess not heard from Zhongli, since, in my opinion, unless we are about to personally see Khaenri'ah for ourselves, then those two old coots will keep their asses shut. Let's not forget about the defiled statue as well. The Abyss originally stole that statue in order to make a mechanized god by removing the core of the statue, replacing it with the eye of the first field tiller, and then somehow attaching Osial's limbs to it. While we were successful in preventing them from doing so by hiding the field tiller's eye in the first place, as of bedtime story, our Abyss sibling has successfully taken it from Dainsleif, meaning that this could be another monster that we'd have to keep an eye out for. There are also some speculations as to why Venti's statue had been the one to be stolen, and by that, I mean people were thinking that the Abyss have some sort of grudge on Venti, or that the statues that belongs to the original 7 have some sort of special property that the Abyss needs. I'd rather think that it's for two simple reasons instead. One is that Barbados has always been known to not be that present in his nation, so the Abyss probably thought that out of all the statues to steal, his will be the one that will be met with the least amount of resistance. And second, the Four Winds of Mondstadt was in quite a disarray in the period between the Cataclysm and now, ranging from Mondstadt's governmental corruption problems, Andreas just being Andreas, and Dvalin suffering from Durin's poison. It just maybe made more sense for the Abyss to target Mondstadt statues instead of a nation like Liye, whose Archon is comparatively much more active and has adeptites like Zhao keeping a close watch of the nation's happenings. And the last story aspect to pay attention to is that Mondstadt's Archon quest portion is still referred to in-game as Genshin's prologue instead of it being their very own portion of the game's main storyline. So let us hope and cross our fingers that we will get a Mondstadt dedicated Archon questline into the future. At least for the sake of this guy from the previous video, since he bet his balls on it being a thing. So Hoyo, get going or someone's gonna get Okaruned real quick. Now, moving to the second most popular point of speculation, is the question of how other Mondstadt character-specific storylines that had long been teased to us will finally contribute itself to the lore. Amongst the ones that the commenters have mentioned, the most popular ones had been how will Varka's return or expedition play into the story, Albedo's literal existence, Alice and the Hexenzirkel mages, Kaeya and his Khaenri'ah connection, and Durin's potential return. We can go through these rather quickly since we don't exactly have that much concrete lore to go on when it comes to diving into these topics individually, but we at least have enough to form some sort of an early speculation. Let's start with Varka's return. The only thing we know so far when it comes to his expedition is that it took him to the far corners of northern Teyvat, where he encountered Capitano and understood that the Harbinger was heading to Natlan. So, despite the popular belief, we can't exactly say that Varka himself have been near the vicinity of Natlan, since he did mention that with Capitano himself going to Natlan, he wouldn't have to worry about the guy anymore, which might imply that Varka's expedition is not anywhere near within Natlan's area. Now, the area of Mondstadt itself that might have a lot to do with Varka's expedition would be the upcoming dormant port. Some people have speculated that the port itself could serve as a place for us to meet Varka's expedition should they either come to rest or finally make their return. Considering its status as Mondstadt's #1 hub of transport, then this would definitely be a logical assumption to make. I just hope that we get to see the port released a lot earlier than before Varka's expedition has to make a return, because honestly though, I'm more of the opinion that Hoyo is just yet to figure out how to properly use his return. Varka went on that expedition with 80% of the knight's manpower, so there should be a lot of people in that group that Hoyo could use as new Mondstadt characters in that regards alone, including Jean and Barbara's parents, the captains of all the other divisions we probably haven't heard of, and many more. Plus, I'm sure that they are also just trying to rack their brains over how it is that they can design Varka to look a lot more like Capitano and not have him be a twink. The limitations of having character model presets. It's bound to bite their asses harder than ever. Now, let's move on to Albedo's literal existence. We can sort of talk about this in tandem with Mondstadt's Hexenzirkel connection, considering that both Alice and Ryandaughtr, the two people who are heavily involved with Albedo's lore, is also part of that circle of mages. Albedo's existence is possible due to the art of Khaenri'ah, Khaenri'ah's form of alchemy that we can kinda just assume to be Teyvat's version of human dark magic, as opposed to pure dark magic, which is the Abyss. And the thing is, Albedo practices the art of Khaenri'ah, and this exact knowledge is what makes Venti and Dainsleif be so wary of Albedo, because it is that same art of alchemy that most likely forced Celestia to put Khaenri'ah down for good. Combine that and the fact that his master and technical parent Ryandaughtr gave him a final assignment, which was to show her the truth and the meaning of the world, a statement that so far in the story has only resonated with the Traveler's Abyss sibling. We can only assume that Albedo is in for some weird shit, and that it might be a big contributor to Mondstadt's overall lore in Teyvat's story. The Hexenzirkel, on the other hand, is something that I still kinda hesitate to really put in a straight line with only Mondstadt. While yes, they do have a secret floating island being a place used to meet often, allegedly, it is also worth mentioning that it might not be the only place where they frequently meet, considering the fact that only two of their members have any direct connection to Mondstadt, being Alice and Barbaloth. I wouldn't be too surprised if they decided to focus on the Hexenzirkel through other regions that isn't Mondstadt. But if they do have it in Mondstadt, then it also wouldn't be too much of a surprise, since these people at one point wanted to throw hands with Barbados and the guy did nothing but to just tell him to calm down instead. So we'll just have to see if they can maybe investigate Mondstadt's ley lines or something, since we know from Diluc's flashback event that Mondstadt's ley lines are also capable of producing some weird stuff from time to time. On to Kaeya and his Khaenri'ah connection. Now, this one we really can't talk too much about, because while it was always stated from the game's release that Kaeya is indeed a spy from Khaenri'ah, we kinda never really understood what that really meant. I mean, as far as Kaeya knows, Khaenri'ah is dead as hell, and even though he is always all mysterious as a character, we don't exactly know what it is he was supposed to be spying on. Was it Barbados he had to spy on? Was it just Mondstadt as a city? Who was he supposed to report any of his findings to? What did his dad mean when he said that Kaeya was the only hope left? Is it because he somehow escaped having any sort of curse be inflicted on him due to some sort of chemia engineering that the Alberics were able to put on him? And might that be the real reason why he wears an eye patch? Because he got injured when he had to fight Diluc, and because of his curse, the eye didn't really heal itself and revealed the corruption beneath it? Only time will really tell. I can only imagine that his role will come when there is a certain Khaenri'ah only power or mechanic that would prove to be vital to the story's progression or not, and he would be the only one to be able to undertake that power since he is the only Khaenri'ah left that can feasibly take up such a mantle. And last but not least, Durin's return. This one is easy. It's probably gonna happen either real soon or real later because Albedo himself had said that Durin's heart is slowly revitalizing itself and could one day beat again, which in Genshin's terms, one day could either mean in the next few patches or literally another 3 to 4 years. We'll just have to see which one it really ends up becoming. Now, for the last section of this video, I'm going to quickly go through some more of Mondstadt geographical connections that people speculated to have a bigger role to play going into the future, and see if there's anything we can think of in regards to these locations. Starting with the Nameless Island and the Thousand Winds Temple, both being places which are locations that originally served as places to worship the goddess of time, Istaroth. While I have discussed the presence of the Nameless Island both briefly in this video and more extensively on the other video, Thousand Winds Temple still has its closed-off gates that could also serve to be a great access for some sort of underground Mondstadt section. Considering the fact that its initial purpose before being turned to a gladiatorial amphitheater by Mondstadt's old aristocrats was to be a stronghold that protects people from the blizzards and winds caused by the fight between the Caribbean and Andreas, it would be cool to see the temple itself have an extensive underground working that would have been used by the people to secure themselves from these storms. The pair of researcher and adventurer that hangs around the temple also mentions about exploring into the ruin itself, so there's definitely a chance that this temple harbors more things within it. And moving on, I want to talk about two places that has sort of lost its Mondstadt traction due to the development of the lore and just its overall state in the story itself. The first one being Mare Javari. Since we now know that it is more of a Natlan area than it is Mondstadt, courtesy of Natlan's latest event, we can safely assume that we're gonna see that location associated more with the region of fire instead of the nation of wind. The second location is the Dandelion Sea. While I understand that there's always the possibility that a region's folklore can end up becoming a real location, there's just nothing that really points to the Dandelion Sea as being a place that actually exists outside of the Fox and the Dandelion Sea book series. Bennett's Hangout did feature a section that refers to the Dandelion Sea, but it looks like it was simply a reference to the book series itself and not actually a representation of the location, since it ended up being quite a disappointing spot if it were to be the real Dandelion Sea. Some people in the comments had their own theories regarding the Dandelion Sea, but a lot of it is just misconceptions of other lore pieces. Someone mentioned that the Dandelion Sea is the sea of flowers that the siblings stood on in the Travail preview, which is a mistake since those are a sea of Intevas instead of dandelions. And one person also mentioned that the Dandelion Sea was leaked in Venti's splash art, which once again is a mistake since those are Cecilia's. There's just not enough for me to actually theorize that this place does exist for real, at least as far as we know. But who knows, maybe Hoyo would start referring to it soon enough and we'll get to see it come out in another 2 or 3 years. And last but not least, the statue of Venti, which is described to be the gateway to Celestia. considering the fact that Mondstadt is the only other region other than Liyue that has produced a Tevat person or being that is known to have ascended to Celestia, we will surely see either that statue itself or the giant windrise tree become a vital story point to this whole notion of Mondstadt's inherently closer relation to Celestia, because we don't truly know what ascending to Celestia really means. What does it mean when a present-day non-Archon ascends to the heavens? Because we have Vanessa, who is human, and Guhua, who is speculated to more than likely be an Adeptus because for some reason Liyue themselves aren't sure whether or not this guy is fully human. And to be fair, considering the fact that a human like Beidou was able to beat a Leviathan serpent without a vision, and a lot of Guhua's feats are of a similar level, it's safe to say that he can be either one. So, since we have those two as the only two beings to have ascended to Celestia, what does that mean? They are now immortal? Do they just live amongst the gods in the sky? Did they just, ascended up there for a bit, then came back down and was like, yeah, it was cool? Or will there be an event one day where we get to see maybe like Vanessa return as a playable character? Because honestly, Vanessa in her Grandmaster uniform is something that could really get my wallet going, so please, Hoyo? In any case, that's about all that I have for today. I did plan on putting speculations about what sort of mysteries Venti might be hiding, since some people said that the things he said to us at the start of the game did not end up matching with the lore's development, particularly the things that he said about allergenes and whatnot, since that concept seems to be completely forgotten. But I decided that if I'm ever going to talk about it, then it probably needs to be in a separate video. This one's gone on for long enough. Thanks for sticking around. Hope you guys enjoyed this dive into Mondstadt's future, and feel very free to leave a like or your thoughts in the comments down below. And if there's any other Genshin or even Star Rail and Zenless topics that you might want me to dive into, then also feel free to leave those suggestions in the comments down below. Or better yet, join my Discord and tell me there instead. Links on the channel. Until the next video, my name's Leafy, and I'll see you all next time. Sayonara.